Come and make me. That's what I said to a 6'5" bouncer twice my weight, right before everything changed. 20 minutes before that moment, he'd called me garbage and threatened to throw me on the sidewalk like trash. Now here I was, a 73-year-old man who probably shouldn't have been out past 9 o'clock, challenging a professional bully to do his worst. What he didn't know was that I'd spent 43 years teaching people like him very expensive lessons. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to how this whole thing started. It was a Tuesday night in October. I remember because the World Series was on, and I'd been thinking about heading down to Murphy's Pub to catch the game with the usual crowd. Murphy's isn't much to look at, just your typical dive bar with sticky floors, neon beer signs that flicker more than they shine, and the kind of worn leather bar stools that have seen more confessions than a Catholic church. But it's been my spot for the better part of 15 years, ever since Martha passed and the house got too quiet for my liking. Thing is, Murphy's had been sold a few months back to some hotshot businessman from the city, guy named Derek Mansfield, who apparently made his fortune flipping properties and turning neighborhood joints into what he called upscale entertainment venues. The writing was on the wall from day one. New management meant new rules, new crowd, and unfortunately for guys like me, new attitudes about who belonged and who didn't. I should probably mention that I'm not exactly an intimidating figure these days. 73 years old, 5'8" on a good day, maybe 140 pounds soaking wet. The arthritis in my hands makes them shake when I'm tired, and I walk with a slight limp thanks to a piece of shrapnel that's been lodged in my left hip since 1971. To most people, I look like exactly what I appear to be, a harmless old man who probably shouldn't be out past 9 o'clock. But Tuesday night, I was feeling pretty good. The doc had adjusted my medication, and for the first time in weeks, my hip wasn't screaming at me with every step. So I grabbed my jacket, an old brown leather bomber that's probably older than most of the bartenders in town, and headed down to Murphy's. The moment I walked through the door, I knew something was different. Young professionals everywhere, electronic music instead of classic rock, and a man-bun bartender who looked personally offended when I ordered a Budweiser and whiskey back. "We don't really do that anymore," he said, pointing to a chalkboard full of $20 cocktails with names like Elderflower Gin Fizz. "Just a beer, then." He poured me something called Hoppy Ending IPA that tasted like Christmas tree sap, but I paid without complaint and found a spot where I could see the TV. That's when I noticed him. The bouncer was impossible to miss. Had to be 6'5", maybe 280 pounds of muscle stuffed into a black t-shirt with security printed across the chest in white letters. His arms were covered in tattoos that looked more like advertisements for a tattoo parlor than actual artwork, and he had that dead-eyed stare that guys develop when they spend their days looking for trouble. His name tag read Diesel, which should have been my first clue that this wasn't going to be a pleasant evening. For the first hour or so, everything was fine. I nursed my overpriced beer, watched the game, and tried to ignore the fact that my neighborhood bar had been turned into something from a magazine spread. But around 9:30, things started getting interesting. A group of college kids had apparently had a few too many of those craft cocktails and were getting loud near the pool table. Nothing major, just the kind of noise you'd expect from kids having fun. But Diesel was watching them like a hawk, and I could see he was just itching for an excuse to flex his authority. Sure enough, when one of the kids accidentally bumped into a waitress carrying a tray of drinks, Diesel was on them like white on rice. I watched him grab the kid by the shirt and drag him toward the door, speaking in that low, threatening voice that bouncers perfect over years of practice. "You're done for the night, college boy. Learn to hold your liquor before you come back to a grown-up bar." The kid was apologizing, offering to pay for the drinks, doing everything right. But Diesel wasn't interested in reasonable solutions. He wanted to make an example, show everyone in the bar who was in charge. I'd seen guys like him before, bullies who got a little bit of authority and turned it into a weapon. After he tossed the kid out, Diesel spent the next 20 minutes walking around the bar, puffing out his chest and making sure everyone knew he was watching. He'd stop at tables, lean over patrons while they were talking, make comments about people's drinks or clothes. Classic intimidation tactics designed to make people uncomfortable. And that's when he set his sights on me. I was sitting quietly at the bar, minding my own business and working on my second overpriced beer when I felt a presence behind me. I didn't turn around, didn't need to. After 43 years in the military, you develop a sense for when someone's sizing you up for trouble. "Hey, old man." I took another sip of my beer and kept watching the game. Sometimes ignoring bullies makes them move on to easier targets. "I'm talking to you, Gramps." This time he put a hand on my shoulder, not quite hard enough to be assault, but firm enough to make his point. I turned around slowly and looked up at him. Up close, he was even bigger than I'd thought, and his eyes had that mean shine that comes from years of hurting people who couldn't fight back. "Can I help you with something?" I asked, keeping my voice calm and respectful. "Yeah. You can help me by taking your old ass somewhere else. This ain't the kind of place for guys like you anymore." A few people at nearby tables had stopped talking and were watching our conversation. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting to see if the old man was going to back down or cause a scene. "I'm not bothering anyone," I said, "just having a beer and watching the game." Diesel let out a laugh that had no humor in it. "Look around, Pops. You see anybody else here dressed like they just wandered in from 1975? This is an upscale establishment now. We got standards." He wasn't wrong about my clothes. I was wearing a pair of worn jeans, work boots that had seen better decades, and that old leather jacket I mentioned. By the standards of this new crowd, I probably did look out of place. "The sign outside still says Murphy's Pub," I replied. "Been coming here for 15 years. Figured I was still welcome." "Well, you figured wrong." His voice was getting louder now, making sure everyone in the bar could hear. "Management reserves the right to refuse service to anyone, and tonight, that's you. So why don't you finish that beer and find somewhere more appropriate for a guy your age?" I felt something hot rising in my chest. Not anger exactly, but something close to it. The kind of feeling you get when someone tries to make you feel small in front of other people. But I've learned over the years that the best way to handle bullies is to stay calm and let them hang themselves with their own rope. "I paid for this beer," I said quietly. "I'll finish it, and then I'll leave." Diesel's face darkened. He didn't like being told what was gonna happen, even in such a reasonable way. "No, you'll leave now. Don't make me ask twice." The bar had gotten noticeably quieter. Even the electronic music seemed softer. Everyone was watching now, waiting to see what would happen next. I looked at my beer, still half full, then back at Diesel. "I'm not causing any trouble. Just let me finish my drink in peace." That's when he grabbed me. His hand closed around my upper arm like a steel trap, and he started pulling me off the bar stool. For a big guy, he moved fast, clearly planning to drag me toward the door before I could react. What he didn't expect was for me to go limp. It's an old technique they teach in special operations. When someone's trying to move you by force, don't fight the momentum. Use their strength against them. As Diesel pulled, I let my full weight drop, forcing him to either let go or support my entire body weight. He chose to let go, and I dropped back onto the bar stool like nothing had happened. "What the hell?" he muttered, looking confused. "Sorry," I said with a slight smile. Bad hip. Sometimes my legs just give out. The people watching started to murmur among themselves. A few of them laughed, not at me, but at the look of confusion on Diesel's face. He wasn't used to old men who didn't cower when he flexed his muscles. That's when he made his first real mistake. "Listen, you crippled old bastard," he said, loud enough for the entire bar to hear. "I don't care if you're falling apart at the seams. You're leaving right now, or I'm going to drag you out of here and toss you on the sidewalk like the garbage you are." The bar went dead silent. Now, I've been called a lot of things over the years. Been insulted by drill sergeants, enemy soldiers, politicians, and my ex-wife's divorce lawyer. But there's something about being called garbage in front of a room full of strangers that hits different when you're 73 years old and just trying to drink a beer in peace. I stood up slowly, my hip giving me the usual twinge of pain, and looked Diesel in the eye. "Son," I said quietly, "I'm going to give you one chance to apologize for that comment and walk away. Take it." Diesel blinked, apparently surprised that the frail old man was talking back to him. Then he started laughing. "Are you threatening me, Grandpa? You and what army?" I couldn't help but smile at that question. If he only knew. "No threat," I said, "just some friendly advice." Diesel's face twisted into something ugly. He'd been challenged in front of his audience, and now he had to prove his dominance or risk looking weak. "Friendly advice? Here's some friendly advice for you, old man. The next words out of your mouth better be 'yes, sir,' and 'sorry, sir,' or you're going to find out what happens when people don't show proper respect." I looked around the bar at all the faces watching us. Young professionals, college kids, couples on dates, people who'd probably never seen real violence outside of movies. They were expecting me to back down, apologize, and shuffle out the door like a beaten dog. Instead, I finished my beer in one long swallow, placed the empty glass carefully on the bar, and said the words that changed everything. "Come and make me." Diesel lunged with sloppy aggression. I stepped inside his reach and drove my elbow into his solar plexus. 43 years of training behind it. He doubled over, gasping. Before he could recover, I twisted his wrist in a direction wrists don't go. He dropped to one knee with a yelp, and I applied just enough pressure to let him know I could snap it. "Here's the thing about respect," I said conversationally. "It's earned, not demanded." The bar was dead silent. Everyone stared at the skinny old man who'd just taken down a bouncer twice his size using minimum necessary force. I'm sorry," Diesel wheezed. "For what?" "For calling you garbage, and for making everyone uncomfortable." I released his wrist and stepped back. Diesel stayed on one knee for a moment, rubbing his arm and trying to catch his breath. When he finally looked up at me, the mean shine in his eyes had been replaced by something that looked like fear. "Who the hell are you?" he whispered. I straightened my jacket and smiled. "Just an old man trying to drink a beer and watch the game." Diesel got to his feet slowly, keeping his distance. He looked around the bar at all the people staring at him, then back at me. "This isn't over," he muttered. "Yeah, it is. And it should have been. In a perfect world, Diesel would have walked out, I would have ordered another beer, and life would have gone on. But this isn't a perfect world, and some people never learn when to quit." About 20 minutes later, just as I was starting to relax and enjoy the game again, the front door opened and Diesel walked back in. Only this time, he wasn't alone. He'd brought 3 friends with him, all built like linebackers, all wearing the same dead-eyed expression that seemed to be the standard uniform for guys in their profession. They spread out as they entered, blocking the exits and making it clear they weren't here for drinks. The bartender with the man bun took one look at them and reached for his phone, probably to call the cops. But Diesel was already moving, walking straight toward me with his crew flanking him. "Remember me, old man?" I turned around on my bar stool and studied the 4 of them. All young, all strong, all convinced they were about to teach a lesson to a mouthy senior citizen. It would have been almost funny if it wasn't so pathetic. "I remember you," I said. "Question is, what are you planning to do with these boys you brought along?" "What I should have done the first time. You embarrassed me in front of all these people. Now I'm going to return the favor." The music had stopped. The bartender was frantically whispering into his phone. Customers were grabbing their things and heading for the exits, except there weren't any exits available anymore. I sighed and shook my head. Some people just don't listen. "Son, you really don't want to do this. Trust me." "The only thing I trust is that you got lucky before. Let's see how lucky you are against 4 of us." That's when I realized this wasn't just about a bruised ego anymore. These guys were planning to hurt me, really hurt me, maybe put me in the hospital, maybe worse. And that changed everything. You see, there's a difference between handling one drunk bouncer who grabbed you and dealing with 4 men who want to cause serious bodily harm. The first situation calls for restraint and measured response. The second calls for survival mode. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 73 years in my joints and muscles. But I also felt something else stirring, something I hadn't felt in a long time. The cold, calm focus that had kept me alive through 4 tours in Vietnam and 20 years of special operations. "Last warning," I said quietly. "Walk away." Diesel laughed and nodded to his friends. They started moving toward me from 3 directions. What happened next was over in less than 30 seconds, but it probably felt like an hour to anyone watching. The first guy, a bald mountain of muscle with arms like tree trunks, came straight at me with his fists raised like he was planning to box. I waited until he was within reach, then kicked him in the knee with the heel of my work boot. His kneecap made a sound like breaking kindling, and he went down screaming. The second guy tried to grab me from behind, but I'd already moved. I spun around and drove my elbow into his throat, then grabbed his head and introduced it to the edge of the bar. He slumped to the floor and stayed there. Guy number 3 was smarter. He'd seen what happened to his friends and was approaching more carefully. But careful doesn't help much when you're dealing with someone who's forgotten more about hand-to-hand combat than you'll ever learn. I feinted left, then pivoted right and swept his legs. As he fell, I grabbed his shirt and used his own momentum to slam him into the wall. Hard. That left Diesel. He was backing away now, his eyes wide with the sudden realization that he'd badly miscalculated the situation. But there was nowhere to go. His friends were blocking his escape routes, though not in the way they'd planned. "Please," he said, and I could hear the fear in his voice. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." "Didn't know what?" "Didn't know you were whatever you are." I walked toward him slowly, and he kept backing up until he hit the wall next to the jukebox. "What I am," I said, "is a 73-year-old man who just wanted to drink a beer and watch the game. What I was is something you should have asked about before you decided to make my life difficult." "What? What were you?" I smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. "The kind of person your government sent to other countries when they needed problems to disappear. The front door burst open, and 3 police officers rushed in with their hands on their weapons. The bartender must have finally gotten through to 911. "NYPD, nobody move!" I raised my hands and stepped away from Diesel, who immediately started babbling about being attacked by a crazy old man. The cops looked around at the 4 younger men, 3 unconscious or moaning on the floor, 1 cowering against the wall, then at me standing there without a scratch on me. "What the hell happened here?" the lead officer asked. "Misunderstanding," I said calmly. "These gentlemen felt I didn't belong in their establishment. We had a disagreement about that." The cop looked skeptical. "A disagreement that put 3 men in the hospital?" They disagreed rather aggressively. By this time, paramedics had arrived and were checking on Diesel's friends. Guy number 1 had a shattered kneecap and would be walking with a limp for the rest of his life. Guy number 2 had a concussion and a broken nose. Guy number 3 had 3 cracked ribs and what the EMT described as severe blunt force trauma to the cranium. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification," the cop said to me. I reached slowly into my jacket and pulled out my wallet, extracting my driver's license and something else, a small plastic card that I hadn't shown anyone in over 10 years. The cop looked at my license first, reading my name and address. Then he looked at the other card, and his expression changed completely. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "Are you serious?" "What's it say?" his partner asked. The first cop held up the card so his colleagues could see it. It was my military ID, expired, of course, but still valid for identification purposes. And right there under my picture and personal information was a line that read, "Classification, Special Operations, Green Beret." "Sir," the cop said, his whole demeanor suddenly respectful, "I need to ask, were you defending yourself here? 4 men cornered me in a bar and threatened violence. I used the minimum force necessary to neutralize the threat." The cop looked around at the carnage again. "This is minimum force? If I'd used maximum force, you'd be calling the coroner instead of the paramedics." One of the EMTs approached us. "Officer, we need to get these men to the hospital. The one with the knee injury is going to need surgery, and the guy with the head trauma might have a skull fracture." "What about him?" The cop pointed at Diesel, who was still pressed against the wall. "Bruised ego and a learning experience," I said. "He'll be fine." The cop made some notes in his report, then looked at me again. "Mr. He glanced at his notepad. "Mr. Patterson, I'm going to need you to come down to the station and give a statement." "Of course." As the paramedics loaded Diesel's friends onto stretchers, the cop pulled me aside. "Can I ask you something, sir? Off the record?" I nodded. "How many tours?" 4 in Vietnam, then 20 years with Special Forces. Retired in '94 as a sergeant major. The cop let out a low whistle. "And these idiots tried to jump you in a bar?" "Young men often mistake age for weakness." "Well, they learn different tonight." He paused. "For what it's worth, sir, from what witnesses are telling me, this was clear self-defense. You shouldn't have any legal troubles." That's when the bar owner showed up. Derek Mansfield was exactly what I'd expected. Mid-40s, expensive suit, hair that cost more than most people's car payments. He took one look at the scene and started screaming about lawsuits and insurance claims and how this was going to ruin his business. "Who's responsible for this?" he demanded, pointing at the blood on his floor and the broken furniture. The cop pointed at me. "This gentleman defended himself against 4 attackers." Mansfield looked me up and down like he was seeing me for the first time. "Him? That old man did all this?" "That old man," the cop said with obvious respect, "is a decorated Special Forces veteran. Your bouncer and his friends made a serious error in judgment. I don't care what he is. This is going to cost me thousands in repairs and cleanup. I want him arrested." The cop's expression hardened. "Sir, this man was defending himself from assault. If anyone's getting arrested, it's the 4 men who attacked him. But my bar, my business." That's when I decided I'd heard enough. "Mr. Mansfield," I said quietly, and something in my voice made him stop talking. "Your employee called me garbage and threatened to throw me on the sidewalk. When I defended myself, he came back with 3 friends to teach me a lesson. Whatever happened to your bar is the direct result of your management choices. You can't prove any of that." I looked around at the dozen or so witnesses who were still in the bar, several of whom were holding up cell phones. "Actually, I'm pretty sure I can." One of the customers, a young woman with her hair in a ponytail, stepped forward. "I recorded the whole thing," she said. "The bouncer called him garbage and grabbed him first. The old gentleman asked him to apologize and walk away. Then the bouncer left and came back with those other guys." "I got it too," said another witness. "Posted it on my Instagram already. It's got like 50 shares." Mansfield's face went pale. "Delete those videos, now." "Actually," the cop interjected, "those videos are evidence. Nobody's deleting anything." I looked at Mansfield and felt something like pity for him. He'd created this situation by hiring bullies and encouraging them to intimidate his customers. Now it was going to cost him everything. "You might want to reconsider your staffing policies," I suggested, "and maybe think about whether turning Murphy's into an upscale establishment was worth all this trouble." By the time we got to the police station, word had somehow gotten out about what happened. As I was walking up the steps to the precinct house, I heard someone call my name. "Sergeant Major Patterson? Is that really you?" I turned around and saw a man in his 50s approaching me. He was wearing civilian clothes, but something about his posture and bearing screamed military. It took me a moment to place him. "Captain Rodriguez?" "It's Colonel Rodriguez now, sir. Alex Rodriguez, 3rd Battalion, 7th Special Forces Group. You trained me at Bragg in '89. I remembered him then. A young lieutenant who'd been part of a group I'd put through advanced combat training. Smart kid, good instincts, willing to learn. "Alex, good to see you, son. What brings you to New York?" "I'm stationed at Fort Hamilton now, running the Joint Operations Center. Sir, I heard about what happened tonight." "Are you all right?" "Fine. Just a misunderstanding that got out of hand." Rodriguez looked skeptical. 4 men in the hospital is a hell of a misunderstanding. Before I could respond, 2 more men approached us. They were younger, probably in their 30s, but they had the same military bearing as Rodriguez. "Sergeant Major Patterson?" one of them asked. "Master Sergeant Mike Thompson, 1st Special Forces Group. This is Staff Sergeant David Kim. We were at Fort Bragg last year for an advanced training course, and our instructor showed us some of your old training videos." "Training videos?" "Yes, sir. Hand-to-hand combat techniques for close-quarter situations. The instructor said you were a legend in the community." I felt embarrassed. "That's overstating it a bit." "No, sir, it's not," Rodriguez said firmly. "Sergeant Major, you trained 3 generations of Green Berets. Half the special operations community has been through your courses at some point." Thompson nodded enthusiastically. "Sir, when we heard what happened tonight, we had to come see for ourselves. The description of your technique, disabling 4 men in under 30 seconds, that's exactly the kind of thing they tell stories about." "Stories?" "Yes, sir. There are legends about you in the community. They say you once took out an entire enemy patrol with just a knife and a rock. They say you taught hand-to-hand combat to Delta Force and Navy SEALs. They say you could disable a man in 12 different ways with just your bare hands. I laughed. Well, some of that might be exaggerated. How much of it? The part about 12 different ways. It's actually closer to 20. By the time I finished giving my statement at the police station, word had spread through what Rodriguez called the network, the informal communication system that connects current and former special operations personnel around the world. My phone, which I'd had on silent all evening, had 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Most of them were from numbers I didn't recognize, but the messages were all similar. Is it true? Are you okay? Do you need backup? Rodriguez offered to drive me home, and on the way, he explained what was happening. Sir, you have to understand, in our community, you're not just another retired soldier. You're the Sergeant Major Patterson, the guy who wrote the book on advanced combat techniques. Literally, we still use your training manual. That thing's 30 years old. Good techniques don't get old, sir. And when word gets out that some civilian bouncer tried to assault you, he shook his head. Let's just say people are not happy about it. It's over now. No need to make a big deal out of it. Rodriguez looked at me in the rear-view mirror. Sir, with all due respect, it's not your call anymore. By tomorrow morning, every special operations unit on the East Coast is going to know what happened, and they're going to want to do something about it. He was right. I woke up the next morning to find 6 men in civilian clothes standing in my front yard, military bearing, quiet conversation, occasional glances at my house. When I opened the front door, they snapped to attention. Sergeant Major Patterson? The speaker was tall and lean with graying hair and combat scars. A faded green beret patch was sewn onto his baseball cap, the kind you don't get from a surplus store. Master Sergeant First Class James Morrison, retired. 5th Special Forces Group. We heard about last night. And you are? Your backup, sir. I don't need backup. It's over. Morrison exchanged glances with his companions. Sir, we got word that the bar owner is planning to file a lawsuit against you. Claims you assaulted his employees without provocation. Let him try. There's video evidence and a dozen witnesses. There's also the matter of his business practices, sir. What do you mean? Another of the men stepped forward. Sergeant Major, my name is Tony Valdez. I work in financial investigations now. Did some digging on this Derek Mansfield character. Turns out he's got a pattern of buying neighborhood establishments and driving out long-time customers to make room for higher-paying clientele. That's not illegal. No, sir, but some of his methods might be. Bribing health inspectors to harass previous owners, hiring convicted felons as bouncers, intimidating customers who don't fit his preferred demographic. The man's a predator. I looked at the 6 of them standing in my yard like some kind of honor guard. What exactly are you proposing? Nothing illegal, sir, Morrison said quickly. But the community feels that Mr. Mansfield needs to understand the consequences of allowing his employees to assault veterans. Community? Valdez pulled out his phone and showed me a social media group called Special Operations Brotherhood. It had over 15,000 members. Sir, the video of what happened last night has been shared on every military forum and social media group on the Internet. There are guys calling for everything from protest demonstrations to direct action. Direct action? Nothing violent, Morrison assured me. But Mr. Mansfield's establishment caters to young professionals, right? People who care about their image and reputation? I was starting to get the picture. And if word gets out that they're patronizing a business that encourages violence against veterans? Exactly. Bad for business. By noon, the situation had escalated beyond anything I could have imagined. Derek Mansfield's upscale establishment was surrounded by what could only be described as a peaceful occupation. Over 100 current and former special operations personnel had shown up, along with their families and friends. They weren't protesting exactly. They were just standing around, talking quietly, and making their presence known. Every time a potential customer approached the bar, one of the veterans would politely engage them in conversation. Not threatening, not confrontational, just friendly chats about military service, veteran issues, and the importance of supporting businesses that respect those who served. Strangely enough, most of the potential customers decided to find somewhere else to drink. The local news crews arrived around 2 o'clock, drawn by reports of a veteran demonstration at a Manhattan bar. When they learned the full story, decorated Special Forces veteran assaulted by bouncer, video evidence, community response, it became the lead story on every news channel in the city. I watched the coverage from my living room, feeling increasingly surreal about the whole situation. The reporter was interviewing Colonel Rodriguez, who explained that this wasn't about vigilante justice or military intervention in civilian affairs. "This is about community," he said to the camera. "When someone attacks one of our brothers, especially someone who dedicated his life to training the next generation of special operations personnel, the community responds. We're not here to cause trouble. We're here to make sure everyone understands that actions have consequences." My phone rang. It was Rodriguez. "Sir, you need to see this." "I'm watching the news. This is getting out of hand." "No, sir, not the news. The bar's Yelp page." I didn't even know what Yelp was, but Rodriguez explained it was a website where people could review businesses. Apparently, Murphy's, or whatever Mansfield was calling it now, had received over 300 negative reviews in the past 12 hours, all referencing the treatment of veterans and specifically mentioning my incident. "Sir, his business is finished. No one's going to want to drink at a place known for assaulting elderly veterans." But the real surprise came at 4 o'clock. I was still watching the news coverage when there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find a man in an expensive suit with the kind of bearing that screamed, "Important person." "Sergeant Major Patterson, my name is General Robert Hayes, U.S. Army Special Operations Command. I'd like a word." I invited him in, offered him coffee, and waited to see what a 2-star general wanted with an old retired soldier. "Sergeant Major, I'll get straight to the point. What happened to you last night is unacceptable. But more than that, it's become a symbol of how our veterans are treated in civilian society. Sir, I appreciate the concern, but let me finish. The response from the special operations community has been overwhelming. We've got active duty personnel requesting leave to join the demonstration. We've got retired generals calling the Pentagon to ask what we're doing about veteran mistreatment. We've got congressmen asking questions." He paused and looked directly at me. "We've also got an opportunity." "Sir?" "The Army is looking for someone to head up a new veteran outreach program. Someone with credibility in the special operations community. Someone who understands both military and civilian cultures. Someone who can serve as a bridge between the two worlds." I stared at him. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a chance to make sure what happened to you last night doesn't happen to other veterans. Full-time civilian position, veterans preference hiring, competitive salary, and the resources to make a real difference. General, I'm 73 years old. And yesterday you disabled 4 men half your age without breaking a sweat. Age is just a number, Sergeant Major. Experience and wisdom are what matter." Before I could respond, there was another knock at the door. This one was louder, more insistent. I opened it to find Derek Mansfield standing on my porch, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair was messed up, and his eyes had the desperate look of a man watching his world fall apart. "Mr. Patterson? Please, I need to talk to you." I glanced back at General Hayes, who nodded slightly. "Come in, Mr. Mansfield." He stumbled into my living room and stopped short when he saw the general. I'm sorry, I didn't know you had company." "Mr. Mansfield, this is General Hayes. General, Derek Mansfield owns the bar where last night's incident occurred." Mansfield's face went even paler. "A general?" "Mr. Mansfield," I said, "what can I do for you?" My business. It's ruined. Nobody will come to the bar. My staff quit. The suppliers are canceling contracts. I'm getting death threats." "Death threats?" "Not real ones," he said quickly. "Just angry veterans saying they know where I live and what I drive. But still—" General Hayes leaned forward. "Mr. Mansfield, what exactly do you want from Sergeant Major Patterson? I want him to call off his people, make them stop the demonstration, tell them I've learned my lesson." "Have you?" I asked. "Have I what?" "Learned your lesson." Mansfield looked confused. Yes, I fired the bouncer. I fired all the bouncers. I'm sorry about what happened." "What exactly are you sorry about?" "I'm sorry you got hurt. I'm sorry the situation escalated. I'm sorry my employee used inappropriate language." I shook my head. "You're not sorry about any of those things. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry it's costing you money." "That's not true." "Then explain to me why you thought it was acceptable for your employee to call an elderly customer garbage and threaten to throw him on the sidewalk." Mansfield opened his mouth, then closed it. He couldn't answer because there was no acceptable answer. General Hayes stood up. "Mr. Mansfield, I think this conversation is over." "Wait, please. What do you want me to do? I'll do anything." That's when I had an idea. "You want to make this right?" "Yes, anything." "Close the bar." "What?" "Close your upscale establishment. Turn Murphy's back into what it was, a neighborhood bar where working people and retirees can afford to have a beer and watch the game." But I spent a fortune renovating it. I'll lose everything." "You're going to lose everything anyway," General Hayes pointed out. "At least this way, you do some good in the process." Mansfield looked back and forth between us, clearly trying to figure out if we were serious. "You want me to just give up my business?" "I want you to give back the neighborhood establishment you took away from the community," I said. "Find someone local to run it. Someone who understands what Murphy's was supposed to be. Make it affordable again. Hire staff who respect the customers instead of intimidating them. And if I do that, then maybe the special operations community will find something better to do than stand outside your business all day." Mansfield was quiet for a long moment, probably calculating how much money he stood to lose either way. "If I agree to this, will you guarantee they'll leave me alone?" "I'm not in charge of them," I said honestly. "But I'll make sure they know you're trying to make things right." 2 days later, Derek Mansfield held a press conference outside Murphy's pub. With news cameras rolling and veterans watching, he made his announcement. He was returning the establishment to its roots and turning the deed over to Jimmy Murphy, the original owner's son, who'd been forced out. Jimmy would run it as a true community bar with affordable prices and respectful staff. Mansfield also established a fund for veteran organizations and promised to help other neighborhood establishments that served veteran communities. Complete victory for the good guys. But the real surprise came a week later. I'd accepted General Hayes's job offer and was scheduled to start work on the new Veteran Outreach Program. My first assignment was to give a speech at a special operations conference about building bridges between military and civilian communities. As I was preparing my remarks, I got a phone call from Jimmy Murphy. "Mr. Patterson, this is Jimmy Murphy. I wanted to invite you to the grand reopening of Murphy's Pub tomorrow night. First drinks on the house." "That's very kind of you, Jimmy. Actually, there's something else. We're planning to establish a tradition at the bar. Every Tuesday night is going to be Veterans Night, half-price drinks for anyone who served, and a reserved table for guys like you who gave so much for their country. You don't need to do that." "Yes, I do. What happened to you never should have happened, and I want to make sure everyone knows that veterans are always welcome at Murphy's." The grand reopening was packed, not just with the old crowd that used to frequent Murphy's, but with dozens of current and former special operations personnel and their families. The electronic music was gone, replaced by classic rock from the original jukebox. The craft cocktail menu had been replaced with simple beer and whiskey options at prices that working people could afford. And in the corner, right where I'd been sitting when this whole thing started, there was a small plaque that read, "Reserved for Sergeant Major Frank Patterson and all who served with honor." I sat at that table with Colonel Rodriguez, Master Sergeant Morrison, and a dozen other guys who'd become friends over the past week. We drank beer that tasted like beer instead of Christmas trees, watched the game on TV, and told stories about the old days. At some point during the evening, a young man approached our table. He was maybe 25, dressed in civilian clothes, but something about his posture suggested military training. "Excuse me, are you Sergeant Major Patterson?" "I am." "Sir, my name is Lieutenant David Chin, 1st Special Forces Group. I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "For showing us that age doesn't mean weakness, and that standing up for what's right never goes out of style. The whole special operations community has been talking about what happened here. You've become an inspiration." I felt embarrassed by the attention, but Rodriguez elbowed me in the ribs. "Take the compliment, Sergeant Major. You earned it." As the evening wound down and the crowd started to thin out, Jimmy Murphy came over to our table. "Mr. Patterson, I hope you'll be a regular here." "Planning on it?" "Good, because I want you to know what you did here changed everything. Not just for this bar, but for the whole neighborhood. People are talking about standing up to bullies, about treating veterans with respect, about community responsibility. You started something important." I looked around the bar, at the working folks and retires sharing tables with special operations personnel, at the old jukebox playing music that everyone could enjoy, at the memorial plaque honoring all who served. "Jimmy," I said, "sometimes the most important battles are fought in the most unexpected places." 3 months later, I was interviewed for a magazine article about the incident and its aftermath. The reporter asked me if I had any regrets about what happened. "Only one," I told her. "What's that?" "I wish it hadn't taken 4 men in the hospital to teach one bouncer about respect." Do you think he learned his lesson? I thought about Diesel, who'd apparently moved back to his hometown in Ohio and gotten a job at a factory. Word was he'd become something of an advocate for veterans' rights, telling anyone who'd listen about the night he learned not to judge people by their appearance. "I think everyone learned something that night," I said. "Sometimes it takes a dramatic lesson to remind people about basic human decency." The reporter asked me about my new job with the Veteran Outreach Program, and I told her it was the most rewarding work I'd done since leaving the military. Every day, I get to help veterans transition to civilian life and educate civilian communities about the sacrifices our service members make. It's not always easy. There's a lot of mistrust on both sides, but slowly, we're building bridges. Any advice for other veterans who find themselves in similar situations? Stand your ground when it matters, but choose your battles wisely. Most people aren't bullies. They're just ignorant about military service and veteran issues. Education usually works better than confrontation. And for civilians who want to support veterans, treat us like normal people. We don't want special treatment or pity. We just want the same respect and consideration you'd give anyone else. And if you see a veteran being mistreated, speak up. Community support means everything. The article ran with the headline, "When Respect is Earned, How One Veteran's Stand Changed a Community." It was picked up by military publications around the world and sparked discussions about veteran treatment in civilian society. But for me, the most important outcome was much simpler. Every Tuesday night, I sit at my table in Murphy's Pub, surrounded by friends and fellow veterans, watching the game and drinking beer that tastes like it should. The bartender knows my order, the regular customers nod when I walk in, and nobody calls me garbage or tells me I don't belong. It's a small thing, maybe, but sometimes small things matter most. Last week, a young soldier on leave stopped by the bar and recognized me from the news coverage. He bought me a drink and said he'd heard about what happened. "Sir," he said, "I just want you to know, what you did here gives guys like me hope. Sometimes we wonder if anyone appreciates our service or understands what we've sacrificed. But seeing how the community rallied around you, it reminds us that there are still people who care." I raised my glass to him. "Son, there are a lot more people who care than there are people who don't. Sometimes you just have to remind them why it matters." As I sit here now, writing this story and remembering everything that happened, I keep thinking about something General Hayes said when he offered me the job. "Sergeant Major, the measure of a man isn't how he handles easy situations. It's how he responds when he's tested." That night at Murphy's, I was tested, and in standing up for myself, I accidentally stood up for something bigger, the idea that all veterans deserve respect, regardless of age or appearance. The response taught me that we're not just individual soldiers. We're a brotherhood. When one of us is threatened, all of us respond. But the most important lesson: most Americans still respect military service. When they understood what really happened, they overwhelmingly supported the veteran over the bully. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought on foreign soil. Sometimes they're fought in neighborhood bars, for nothing more than the right to drink a beer in peace and be treated with basic human dignity. That's always a battle worth winning.